Great, let's jump in. So again, thanks everyone for being on the line this morning, and welcome to our webinar, How Higher Education's IT Priorities and Roles Will Likely Shift Post-COVID-19. My name is Katie Gaston. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager, and today I'll be helping to facilitate the discussion. So before we get into it, just a few things that we'll go over, a few housekeeping slides. All attendees, just so you know, will be on mute throughout today's presentation, but if you have questions for us, please go ahead and use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and feel free to type your questions throughout the call. Our panelists will be responding to questions throughout the webinar, so please share thoughts or questions, and I'll try to integrate them throughout some of the prepared questions we have today. The webinar is being recorded and will be sent to all attendees. And if you have to hop off for another meeting in the middle, we'll go ahead and send it if you registered as well. And then finally, if you're interested in learning more, our next panelist webinar will actually be on June 25th with the Institute of Effectiveness for Higher Education. And we'll be showcasing how institution leaders can best support the shifting student population with the potential influx of more part-time students in the fall. So keep that in mind to June 25th. And before, as a next step, before we get into the discussion, I just want to say a little bit about the host and the sponsor of today's webinar. So the host of today's webinar is Quali Build. Quali is a software company built out of higher education. We build software primarily for higher education. Quali Build is a product that Quali offers that's a low-code forms and workflow solution. So we let departments automate real business processes, and there's absolutely no code required. It's completely low code. You can see you can create an application and create forms that allows users to add in simple and complex information, even showing or hiding fields and sections throughout, and then have some diverse workflows so you can route and approve forms throughout an organization as well, including updating integrations, updating other line of business systems with integrations. So a little bit about Quali Build, and then our sponsor of today's webinar is Harvard Partners. Harvard Partners, we're actually welcoming the founding and managing partner, Matt Firm, to join us as a panelist on today's webinar. Thanks, Matt, for being on. Just a little bit about Harvard Partners. Harvard Partners offers IT consulting and staffing services for various industries, including higher education. They are a trusted advisor in the broad discipline of running IT as a business, aligning people, processes, and technology with organizations' strategic goals and initiatives. And Harvard Partners specifically specializes in offering IT assessments, IT staffing, IT project management, as well as some management consulting services. So those are the hosts and sponsor of today's webinar. Now let's get into the meat of the discussion. I'm excited to introduce the panelists that we have for today's webinar. So first and foremost, we have Matt Firm, like I mentioned, the founding and managing partner of Harvard Partners. Prior to Harvard Partners, Matt spent 17 years with Wellington Management Company, LLP. And as an associate partner and director of enterprise technologies, Matt was responsible for managing the global physical computing infrastructure of this financial services firm. Thanks for, again, sponsoring today's webinar and being on the line, Matt.
Great, thank you.
Next up, we have Garrett Yoshimi, the Vice President of Information and Technology and CIO for the University of Hawaii Systems. So again, Garrett is responsible for the University of Hawaii system-wide information technology systems and services. Garrett provides executive leadership in the overall vision, goals, strategies, and plans for the effective use of information technologies. And Garrett is one of our advisors on our Quali Build Design Advisory Board. So thanks again, Garrett, for being on the call.
Thanks,
and
Kate.
Last but not least, we have Regal, the Research Information Systems Director at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. Roy joined the University of Alabama, Huntsville in 2005 as a staff member in the Central IT Department. He has been working in the IT-related areas throughout the campus, including Central IT, Student Services, and Research. And he is currently the Research Information Systems Director. And they actually went live with Quali's other product, Quali Research, in 2020. So again, thank you for being on the line.
Thank you.
And next, let's jump into the discussion. So we've consistently heard over the last few months, as I'm sure you all have felt, how challenging the current pandemic experience has been, whether that's having to really quickly shift classes online and support literally thousands of workers on your institutions, sometimes within a week. Now, what we found is both daunting, exciting, whatever word you want to use, is that institution IT leaders have really taken a front seat in this unprecedented change, quickly adapting the needs of their institution now within the last few months and starting to adapt and plan for what does fall look like, which looks, I'm sure as you all know, very different across your institutions. And past fall, what does that actual future hold? We're starting to see IT leaders being taken on in a new light on campuses, and actually in an exciting way have a precedent to set about how IT can really make a monumental change on institutions and truly help drive the future of not only IT, but ultimately the mission of their institution forward. So what does that mean for IT, for pretty much all of you who are on the call? How do we actually expect this to change what IT's role has historically been and how they're seen on the campus? And what are the things that you can be doing right now to prepare for some of that shift? So that's what we're going to talk through today. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen and we'll get into the meat of the questions. So the first question that I'd love to know from you all is, prior to COVID, prior to all of what's happened in the last few months, what were your priorities this year and how have you seen those immediately change over the course of the last few months? Garrett, if you want to kick us off and then we can just go through each panelist if you'd like.
Sure, thanks Katie, I appreciate it. So pre-COVID, so everybody's talking pre-COVID, post-COVID these days, but pre-COVID, a lot of our priorities were around making sure that enterprise systems continued to run. We had updates in progress, a lot of incremental work in terms of trying to make our systems better, more functional, more reasonable, easier to use. And along this, or at the same time, a parallel move to implement a number of online courses and in a number of different formats too. So it's interesting that, again, about a couple of years ago, we've got a number of initiatives around not only modernizing infrastructure, but also around modernizing the institution. And then, you know, we step into spring of this year and all of a sudden the floor drops out, everybody's kind of frantically pivoting over a matter of days, in some cases a couple of weeks, to a purely online world. Now, the pivot was really a survival pivot. It was something that everybody basically had to do in a short period of time. I think for the most part, most of the institutions across the nation did very well in the pivot. Varying levels of success in different parts of the organization, but I think the organization as a whole, well, speaking for the University of Hawaii, we were pretty well prepared to make the pivot happen in a short period of time. We were fairly successful, I'd say, to execute through the remainder of the semester. Graduated people finished courses. We had a little bit of drop off, just like everybody else, but I think for the most part, we were able to kind of weather the first wave of the shift. Now is our opportunity, as you talked about going into fall, now is our opportunity to really do it right and do it better and do it the right way going forward. We think there's a lot of opportunities to not only change the way we deliver instruction as a whole and improve on that online experience from the spring experience, but also to see and make sure that we can implement that kind of change across the institution, in our institutional backends, in our business processes. That's really where the opportunity sits. And CIOs have never wasted a crisis. CIOs have the opportunity to sit front and center in your organization to help make that happen. A couple of years ago, several institutions were thinking very seriously about scaling back in terms of pure cost savings and scaling back their organization. And some of them even reorganized their IT infrastructure under finance or administration, basically a level down from the organization. this COVID opportunity really allows or provides an opportunity to be front and center at the executive table and help to drive the institution into the future.
Thank you, Garrett, for that perspective. Matt or Roy, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in here. First of all, I'm representing our clients, which include higher ed, nonprofit, and commercial clients. And one of the, it's interesting as I thought about this question in particular, I was getting down to the minutia of what each client had for their projects, and when I bubbled it all up, it came to three different things. One was continued cloud migration, cloud adoption, cloud, everything cloud. And the second one was digital transformation. And in a way, we found that they go a bit hand in hand as people sort of think about how they're going to change, where they're going to do their processing. They also tend to think, how will I do my data processing? And then the final one continues to be cybersecurity. And that's an ongoing thing, and nothing has changed this year versus other years. A little less panic maybe, but still the top priority.
Yeah, for us, we are actually in a very specific areas supporting research IT. So prior COVID, as you introduced us, we just had quality launched in 2020, FY 2020. The main goal was have the system up and running and training all the OSP and CNG and all the researchers how to use the software. And then the outbreak happens. Our goal now actually is concentrated on customers, the people that have to work remotely. As basic as how do I even have my machine running, how do I connect to VPN so I can access to my files. That become very specific, individual based. And more than ever, our group has been called on multiple times, and our experiences becomes much more valuable now to the VP level, the president level. They want to hear us from the front line, say how do we properly function on the IT area when they are home, versus before we in a big umbrella of on campus, everything's fine.
I think we lost your audio there.
Okay.
Still breaking up a little, so check that. Thank you for your perspective. And Matt, I wanted to check with you. I appreciated how you highlighted those core priorities. Are those the priorities that you've seen that have come out post-COVID, or have you seen those still be the central ones throughout this year, even with the pandemic?
Right. Well, I would never say post-COVID right now because I still believe we're in it, but yes, I understand. Those priorities, I think, are even more, if you could say that there's a higher priority level than the highest priority level, they've taken, they've gone front and center. So what did we do? And just to say it, that if all of you don't realize that you're kind of rock stars in this world, what you managed to do in a week or 2 weeks time, honestly, from my point of view, looking in sort of from the outside, it is a true miracle. And that's not because you weren't prepared, it's because you have been prepared. And for many of our clients, they're in the similar situation. Transition for them, more on the commercial side, if they were prepared with the cloud and if they were digitally transformed, love that word, right? Then the transition to work from home was very simple. It was a day, it was 2 days, and it turned out not to be a big deal at all. This turned out for most of our clients not to be a technology event. Technology was the solution to a very big business problem. And so what I'm hearing is, how do we accelerate, those are the words, different cloud initiatives, different things like get the phone system into the cloud, which turns out to be a big deal for most of our clients. And there are some really simple ones, like everyone forgot about faxing. They still had a fax machine in their office, right? And an easy problem to solve. But we found all these little gotchas that when we did business continuity testing and DR testing, never really showed up, because in a one-day event, you never experience those things. So I'm seeing a more aggressive approach to all those three items, pretty much in that order. Surprisingly, cybersecurity, the concern is far greater, but nobody has all the answers yet, and that's not their top priority. Top priority is how do we remain in business, and how do we make sure people are okay.
Yeah,
that's a good call out, though. Go ahead, Garrett.
If I can add on to the thoughts of both Matt and Ray, the interesting part. So as Matt noted, when you do business continuity testing, it's really an event. It starts and it stops, and it's a relatively short period of time. And one of the things that happened over the spring is we now expose those business processes that are that were constructed because we were, as Ray said, all under the umbrella of campus. And if you had to do something, you pick up a stack of paper, you walk over to the next building, and you take care of it there. Those mechanics simply are not available to us for the most part. Our campuses actually remained open through the spring, but we had no student, or except we had residence hall students on campus, which was a small percentage for us, and we had probably in the neighborhood of 10% of staff on campus. So the majority of folks were working from home, working remote, and that by itself exposes a bunch of things and inefficiencies in the way that our business processes are crafted. So that's a very high opportunity. It's high on the list. We've got a number of working groups working on preparing for the fall. But a lot of those groups are in fact focused on, okay, how do we change those processes? We get rid of some that don't make sense anymore, but also change them in a way such that they work no matter where folks are. And this is not just faculty and staff, but students as well. We had just like most universities, you have the stack of paper forms that you're going to torture a student with because they want to do something. So the student has to pick up the form, fill it out, and literally navigate their way across the campus, right? If you're on a campus, to get things signed, find people, get them to sign, find people, get them to sign, and then hand it off to somebody that's going to do something. That doesn't work in this environment. Even if people come back to campus and we start to have large clusters of both students and faculty and staff on campus, we don't want to do that anymore. That's not the way we're going to do business in the future, and that's a huge opportunity for us moving forward.
That's a really good call out. I know process challenges inflict everyone. Paper and PDF inflict everyone, so using it as an opportunity to try to address that is smart. I guess then a follow-up question to that would be, we all know to a certain extent, or to a very large extent, that budgets will likely be affected in some capacity on campuses, whether that's on a small level, depending on your institution, or quite large, likely in the fall because of this. So how are you taking into account some of that shift and some of the unpredictability as you're starting to think about what are you going to do next to address some of these challenges, particularly when you look towards fall?
Specific to
I think we're still having some audio issues on your side, Ray.
So let me jump in. So both of us are actually public institutions. So huge challenges from a budget perspective, especially going forward. We've got large question marks in terms of what the next fiscal year budgets will look like. We know they will be impacted, certainly. We just don't know how much. So two opportunities for us. One is most of us have access to CARES funding, in particular that fund direct responses to changes in the institution related to COVID. But I think we also have to prepare ourselves for a financial environment that's going to be very different than what we're used to, even in the past few months. I think the past few months turned out to be okay from an execution point of view. That's going to be drastically different going into the next fiscal year. And then however long, so post-COVID, when we actually get there, however long the economic recovery takes, which is likely several years past that, there's going to be some pretty severe impacts. The bright shining spot, and in fact, the area that raised is right in the middle of is research. So the extramural funded research is going full blast. There, so those funds are not impacted, at least in the short term, and that gives us an opportunity to keep that part of the engine running. And for us, that's in fact one of the state strategies for to try and trigger economic recoveries. And I'm pretty sure Ruiz is the same thing in his state.
Yeah. Katie, can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Yeah, actually, yeah, we, for the month of March and April, it was very nerve-wracking. We watched very closely on the proposal and awards and submissions and expenditures and authorization to spend. Luckily, our number on our campus is not being affected. It's still on the right trend, and that kind of calms down the upper management. Now, moving forward, yes, we even have a very specific numbers coming out. Like in the research area, anything we purchase over $1,000 has to be approved by VP. I mean, it was as specific to that, because we a lot of unknowns, as Ms. Gary said. We don't know the enrollment is going to be like in the fall. We don't know how many people can come back to the laboratories. I mean, from the IT part of the world, we can do this at home. Everything can be solved through a computer, sure. But we have a lot of researchers that have come into the laboratories where the $1 million equipment that they have used, they can't take home. And they have been blocked for a couple months now. So we're slowly opening those up. But still, there are some unknowns. But because of that, we have taken very aggressive measurements on what we can spend, whatever we can say we have to until everything calms down. But right now, it's still an unknown because we don't know what the fall is going to look like on student body level. Like, are we having some students coming back? Are they now adopted to online teaching and learning? They actually prefer that way. I mean, we just don't know, so.
I reached out to 3 of our higher ed clients who are private institutions, not well endowed, and the reaction was the same from all 3. IT budgets have been almost completely cut, other than what it takes to, I'll use the word survive from an IT perspective. Just run the place. All discretionary spending has been cut, and their reaction was they didn't say anything about to defer future losses. It was just to defer the losses that occurred, in the past few months after, from the time this started to today. I had one very interesting reaction from an IT director, which was, it's okay. We've been putting in so much technology over the years. This is our opportunity to leverage what we've done and teach people how to use different technologies and really go deeper into the technologies we have. And I was shocked. I mean, the normal reaction from IT is, I want more, I want more. His attitude was, we're going to be able to do a lot, even with what we have. So it was a very positive attitude, which was good to hear.
That's great. So it sounds like the strategy is less, how do we acquire new tools to get through this? Because obviously the budget isn't there, but how do we really dive deep with our existing relationships to take advantage of the tools we have and understand how to utilize them? I would imagine there's a lot of tools and institutions that you're using 10% of, and there's a lot more that you could do. So that's a helpful perspective. Taking a slightly different turn, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot about, which I think is really interesting, is one, this debate about, well, is remote temporary or is remote here to stay? And or is there a combination of the two that is interesting when we look for the future, not only in teaching, but also in work, in higher education. And then the second item of that is, how are we going to see the impact of the IT structure and the IT organization be affected? And so obviously there's either, depending on the size of your institution, central IT and or distributed IT. And we've heard from some of our partners that they're re-looking at that model to determine, does that same model make sense? Is that going to change with some people being remote versus centralized? So I'd love to hear, maybe Garrett, if you want to kick us off again, your perspective about, will the general structure of IT shift? Do you think that it will, from what we've experienced through the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's, for us at least, it's a little early to talk about that level of shift in the IT structure. So we're highly distributed. Central IT is about 40% of the IT headcount for our system. And we have 10 campuses that are distributed across the state. So some level of distributed IT is going to be just natural based on the campus distributions. I think to the other question about, is remote work here to stay? We think it is. We think, obviously not 90 or 100% like we're running now, but there's a large parts of our organization that are actually running as well as they were pre-COVID. And in many cases, the benefits to the organization and its employees is pretty interesting when you take a look over the longer term. So we think there's, just like in instruction, we think the work from home thing will be a hybrid model going forward. And in fact, it's not going to go away. We think it actually will persist over a fairly long period of time. Now, what does that mean? It's hard to say. Do people shift in and out depending on either days of the week or project requirements? That's probably going to happen. Some jobs naturally are on-premise jobs just because, but I think there'll be a pretty interesting mix as we go forward. I think the opportunity as that starts to settle in addition to how the instructional side changes, may change the way that distributed IT needs to support the organization. So I know some of our colleagues have done over the past probably 3 or 4 years some pretty major centralization shifts and trade-offs in terms of who does what and how those efficiencies are handled across the organization. Most of them were able to gain efficiencies when they did that. But I think this gives us an even better opportunity to relook at how that structure supports instruction, how that structure supports the institution, and then decide, how we tweak the distributed nature of the organization. Again, just like work from home, we're not going to go all central. We're not going to go all distributed. There's no polar answer that makes sense, but the answer is in fact someplace in between. And I think we'll move the slider. I think the slider will in fact move, especially when we consider some of the workforce being remote.
So first of all, I think the issue of centralized versus decentralized IT, it's been around for the 40 years that I've been doing IT. I don't think it's ever going to go away. They're good discussions to always have as business evolves. In this case, I think what we were going to see is a shift towards centralized IT, because as more controls get put into place for the CFOs and COOs of the world, it's easier to try to control one organization than control many. And the question of, if you need approval to buy a PC, how many different people will be going for that approval as opposed to one group who can coordinate all those activities. So my belief is in the short term, things will stay centralized. I also believe that let me put it this way. We don't have a client who isn't thinking to themselves that whatever happens in the next 3-4 months will be the end of this event. Everybody might return to the office or to campus, but the likelihood is they're going to be sent home again. There will be incidents. We actually haven't controlled, we haven't solved any problems in the opening up of things. We're just, tend to be reacting to people's, losing their minds from being home all the time. But we need to plan for a recurrence of what's happened, and our clients are doing that. And we need to plan for a hybrid environment, because you're not going to bring everyone back at the same time. And for that reason, I think this is, to Garrett's point, it's going to stick. This is going to be the reality. There'll be things that should be done on campus and things that don't need to be done on campus. And that balance, IT will need to deal with that, and IT has dealt with it. And as I said before, for us, this really was more of a business problem than an IT problem. IT had the answers in place already, most of them. And so now for IT, it's really how do we handle this? We had the right win, right? We had our technologies in place. The business of higher ed and other businesses were able to run. How do we now position ourselves for the next, whatever comes next, and position ourselves going forward? And I think it's all going to be about getting ahead of where the business is, of business problems, because that's what we've demonstrated we can do very well now. And we should have that confidence from others in the organization, which will let us play at a different level in the organization. I think it's a very exciting time for IT.
Great.
Yeah, actually, follow up on Matt. That's exactly what's happening in our area, since we're actually more specific into a certain areas of research. We have a lot of actually cases that's just happening right now as we speak, from before the vice president, the president asking us or telling us what to do. Now it becomes, what do you recommend we should do? Now that becomes, they put us in the front saying, okay, instead of have each department manage their own machine, can we centralize this? That way we don't run into a problem where when everybody needs to go home and work, they realize half the people don't have a machine to take home. I mean, or how to just simply do the remote, right? And then for our campus, because the research areas, we actually decide to, this approach we're gonna have is that some researchers have to be on campus. I mean, those equipments that they cannot take it home. I mean, those are DoD research equipments, those are, rocket launches, they're explosive, that they're in danger. We can't just let them, do it off campus. So the protocols they have to be on campus. That means that people that actually can work home, they actually recommend you to stay home. So that way, the people that have to be on campus, they will be on campus. We don't have to have more people that need to be, so we don't cross paths and get more infections. Now, our support then will go with that. If let's say if there's 50% people coming on campus, then our group can maybe have 50% come in for the tier 1, tier 2 support for the help desk part. But overall, yeah, it is actually very interesting. They put us into a front of every another group now. Hey, what did the IT guys say about this? Back to Gary's example, like the paper, right? And we have mentioned to the management for a long time, hey, we don't have to handle paper all the time. Let's save the trees, electronic signatures, everybody be happy. Now, they actually turn the table now, start asking us. And we said, well, we mentioned this to you 2 years ago, but it was never really put into place, right? But now they are forced to look at it. It's like, oh, okay, actually that's a good idea, So we try to take some positive out of the whole thing. So.
Despite the challenges of the situation, it sounds exciting. I mean, you have an opportunity to be in a really spotlight seat. And it sounds like, in a sense, without saying this in a negative way, that the tables are turning, where the recommendations that you're making are not only heard, but they have to be listened to and carried out. So actually, that's a really good transition to the next question I had, which talks a little bit about the positioning of IT on campus. So historically, IT leaders have sit, depending on where you are, if it's centralized or decentralized, under different areas within the hierarchy structure of an institution. And what we're hearing in the industry is that this event might be a precedent to have IT have a stronger voice at the institution, whether that's a seat at the executive table or something that creates, again, similar to how IT is structured, a different role overall in higher education. So could you all talk to if you think that that is actually the case, and if so, are there certain things that you're planning to put in place over the course of the next few months because of that shift?
So maybe I'll kick us off. We've been pretty fortunate here at the University of Hawaii, where IT has been at the executives table, so we sit with the group of officers that is responsible for the university system as a whole. So we've been fortunate to have that seat at the table for a number of years now, being predating me being in the seat. And we're fortunate that our executives, number one, appreciate the contributions that IT makes to the organization from both a structural as well as a strategic point of view. And I think, as everybody's talked about, this is the opportunity to reinforce the thinking that it was a good decision to do it in the first place. And then for those institutions that maybe the CIO is one level down from the executive council or the C-suite equivalent for the organization, this is really the opportunity to demonstrate both capability as well as ability to be a part of the organization, and not just respond to bits and pieces as some of us are used to in a firefighting mode, but really sit front and center and demonstrate the ability to participate as part of that, as part of the organization's leadership. And I think, many of my peers, we see everybody stepping up to, whether or not they sit at the table now, everybody's stepping up to do what they can do for the organization. I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I think I concur, Garrett, completely. And I think the important messages here for your staffs, they need to look at this. I keep saying it, but I'm going to not stop, as learning about this is a business event, and IT was ahead of it. IT is responding to it. And now IT has to learn from that in terms of we are business people. We're not just technologists. We don't just live in the basement. We don't have to stare at screens all day, but we should take the initiative, take the leadership role to participate. Don't wait for people to come to us. We did get it right. And there's no reason that we shouldn't be getting it right going forward. And so, really getting people to listen to the business, be great listeners, and then learn from that, I think is the biggest message we can deliver to our staff. They shouldn't, it's less important whether you're using, Teams or Zoom. It's more important to understand what this has done to allow everybody to keep working.
Yeah. For us, actually, one of the challenges is we got pushed too much into the front. Almost everyone needed us. We literally have to manage the projects on a different skill level, because suddenly everyone needs help, and everyone needs our expertise, inputs or answers, or lead into a direction. Sometimes can be very small as just tier 1 help desk support to how do I have this announcement out campus wide on how do we follow certain protocols, and those kind of specifics that kind of push us to a point where we had to be careful on how do we suddenly becomes like the front guy, and whatever we recommend, it will happen. But sometimes we had to be able to think overall picture that, to make sure that we do the right way. And yeah, it's the business process of definitely have to be remeasured and make sure that we do the right thing, and the timing also. Who comes first? Everyone's problem is the biggest problem,
Right, and one of the things is IT is so used to getting relegated to not being in the front that this is a difficult transformation for IT. We're seeing it with almost all of our clients, and that's why I say it's in my mind, that's the real learning experience here for IT. And through that process, as the rest of the organization sees IT, and I'll say, I don't know if it's mature, I think it's more that it transforms itself. I think they will gravitate towards that, and they will then embrace that. Because in general, people want partnerships rather than, they want you to be with them on it rather than just support them. It's a stronger bond.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that so when I ran a few years ago, when I ran infrastructure for the organization, the best days that we had is when nobody said anything. When infrastructure does not get noticed because it's working, that's like the best case in the world. Now you have to balance that with, okay, but figure out how to make it better and figure out how to integrate it with the business, because business leads, and that's the part that's important. So it's mixing the, okay, we want to be under the radar, we want to make sure the pipes and plumbing all work and everything's, and the help desk is clear. But it's so much more than that now. It's all about making sure that we can take it to the next level and engage with the business, actively engage with the business to promote change.
So I think the point that you all are making right now is really critical, where it's, let's not lead with IT, let's lead with business priorities and let those influence what IT does. So I guess my question then would be, Matt, to your point, there's a big shift potentially in some IT departments that aren't used to taking that approach, or that have been so inundated with requests that it's really hard to shift that quickly. What advice would you give to those types of teams to help them shift that approach, so where they do listen to the business? What are some specific things you would recommend that they do in their approach to working with other individuals in the institution?
So my experience is that in higher ed, for sure, most of the IT people are actually very interested in the business of higher ed. This is not a case where they're just there to do their jobs and they're just IT people and they fix PCs, right? Most people I meet are genuinely engaged, want to be engaged. And I think it's now a question of giving them partially giving them the opportunity and partially giving them just that little push. And if that means sort of setting them up with different leaders in the organization to go sit down, have conversations, and then make sure that they turn that into action of some sort. That doesn't mean everything's going to be approved. We're going to go through the worst budget cuts, I believe. You can't have 20% unemployment without all of us being impacted, right? It's not going to happen. But to the point of that IT person I mentioned who said, we're going to figure out how to deliver value using what we already have, right? That's an awesome statement, right? And so encouraging people to start to take that approach. And the way you do that is not to wait for people to come to you. It's to go and say, okay, for example, we have clients now, two of them right at this moment are doing surveys to ask, as they go back to offices or campuses, they're asking, what was your experience like at home, right? And a lot of questions involved there, not just IT. But that's an opportunity to start to listen, even though it's passive listening, and then take that and say, what can I do? And notice I'm using the term I rather than we. I think this is a place where we can encourage people as individuals to think out of the box, rather than what we typically do is encourage teams or groups. Both are very important, but here's where we can get people out of their shells and really coax them to be able to do that.
Yeah, the ability to interact with the business is super important. If we were pre-COVID, the approach would be get out of the building, go meet with people, talk to your constituents, talk to your peers, start to have those conversations, even if it's just, hi, I'm so-and-so, this is what I do, what do you do? In a post-COVID world, there's so much pressure to bring different parts of the business together, to figure out how to make changes in the organization. So it's no longer is it a solution looking for a problem. There's tons of problems on the table. We have to triage the problems, figure out which ones make the biggest difference to the organization. Have at it, get results, get things done, even if they're kind of low-hanging fruit wins. And even if we're going to replace them later on, let's get them done. Let's affect the business process, improve the business, and iterate on top of that to to continue to deliver improvement into the institutions. I think that's super important. And to Matt's point about having people, so our folks are really smart. They truly and they absolutely care about the institution, but it is all about making sure we break down those walls and empower individuals to make contributions to the whole. And it really is, and it's okay to make mistakes too. I mean, that's, everybody's afraid to, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to screw this up. But it is about affecting change, and change happens, and it's not always perfect. But if you don't take action, then you never affect change.
Yeah, so for us, I think the challenge that I'm facing is people to translate between the business world to the IT world. A lot of times they're wanting something that actually is not exactly what they're wanting, or they think it's a very complicated project. For us, actually, it's pretty simple. And reverse was, that's the worst one. They think, oh, just do this. And actually, no, there's a lot of ABCs before the D happens. Be able to translate that. With my team, I think the challenges were we are not getting any more people, and yet our work almost doubled because of all the people that's working from home. So I encourage the team and let them know that there's challenges definitely ahead of us, and I think a lot of guys actually are willing to prove themselves. So when difficult time like this happens, they want to show their true values. Before, they will never really, hey, if it's working, it's supposed to. If it doesn't, it's your fault, kind of thing. Now it becomes, you can be a hero. You can be the one that can take over a project and show them how to properly get it done. And even when we have a difficult time, we keep it going. We don't stop. This kind of attitude that keep the team, I think, definitely helps overall and performing wise. And we've been actually doing really well, actually, as an IT support team.
Yeah, I just want to mention that for our private institutions, they are bracing for, excuse me, staff reductions. They're pretty certain that's going to be happening, and that makes it even more challenging because, to your point, it's the workload increased, the budgets are decreasing, staff count might be decreasing, and your other point that people don't really know how to change, right? And so this is the investment as CIOs, as CTOs, really, we can make our own investment in terms of training our own people. This become, that people need to be taught. They're not going to be able to figure it out for themselves. They've been just doing the same thing for so long in the same way. And they need that. They need the motivation. They need the need to be there, but they have to learn the right skills. And it's very foreign to, we do a lot of IT assessments, and when we do an assessment, we look at three different things. We look at what are the users saying, right? Those are your consumers of your services. What are the executives saying? If you think about it, those are your investors. They're the ones who give you the money to do things. And then we look at IT, and those are the delivery people. And I can tell you every single time, and we've done probably over 100 of these, IT knows what to do, but they don't know how to make it happen, which is what causes IT to get frustrated a lot. And so they need to be taught. That's an important thing.
So I'll turn the tables a little bit on some of the statements that Matt made. We absolutely have to do that as IT. The other part of it is to encourage and to really get participation from the business units to help us help them. It is about collaboration in the organization, and it is about it is not about taking requirements and tossing them over the wall and then waiting patiently or impatiently for things to come out the other side. And by the way, when you do that, the stuff that comes out is never what you thought it was going to be coming in. But it is also about, and this is one of the things we're finding right now, is the business units are absolutely willing to engage and collaborate through this process. Given that not only we bring technology to the table, but tools and the ability to use those tools, I think, are super important to make sure that those collaborations can be encouraged. And to the extent that we can help them help themselves along the lines of making sure that we maintain some consistency across the across the institution, I think that's a huge win for us too. It partially addresses the fact that there's no new headcount. There absolutely is no new headcount, and just like Matt said, some of our peers in the Northwest, especially the smaller privates, have already had personnel rollbacks. So you're not going to get 100 more people. You're not going to get one, but what you can do is to encourage collaboration amongst the institution to make sure that everybody can participate to improve the outcomes. So we've actually found some really good, especially in the past couple of months, there's some really good engagement at the business level to help us make that happen.
I thought some of the things that you were saying about how you can work with your team and staff to make sure that they're trained to be supported through this is really important. And I think that's a really good segue to the next question that I had, which was, in a sense, is there anything that you wish you had learned earlier in your career to help you prepare for this? Or on the flip side of that, what recommendations would you have to someone who's either a junior in IT or maybe looking for long-term career aspirations as a role of a director of IT, CIO, to help them if they were in your shoes now going through it?
I wish I would have had more engagement with the business units or the business, whatever business I was in at the time. I mean, I've had probably, 15, 18 jobs in different kinds of organizations. But in the early part of the career, engaging more with the business side instead of trying to figure out how to go hide behind a terminal when I was doing it. I think that's a really big deal. And I think that's a must-have for people in our part of the organization going forward. That's an absolute must-have. You have to understand and be able to collaborate with your business partners. And it's not trading documents. It's not, oh, you didn't get the requirements exactly right, so I'm going to wait until you get it right before we go do our thing. That's not the process. The process is you engage, you iterate, you make things happen. Mistakes are okay. You learn from your mistake and you build on it. I think that's a really big deal. And the earlier, the better.
I think as IT leaders, it's important that we, I was fortunate. I had many managers and IT leaders and technology leaders who sort of invited me into their world, as well as many business people who did the same thing. And so I didn't know what I was doing at the time, and it was all very foreign to me, and some of it was extremely scary. My second job was back in 1984. Yes, I'm old. Second day at work, I'm told, please go, you're going to present at the Apple II users group in Washington, D.C. I had never done that before. Well, I was a programmer. I didn't know what I was doing. And magically, I got in front of people, and I was scared, and I did it, and I'm sure I did a lousy job. But it started to teach me that is important, learning how to communicate. And I needed my manager at the time to throw me into the deep end. I would have never done it myself. And I think that's having people who will do that for you is really important. And then just learning and talking even amongst yourselves, starting to change the dialogue in IT. And this is where that everyone who's on the line might be yelling and screaming at me in a few seconds, but stop worrying about technology. The technology's there. There are plenty of partners we have who will help you with the technology, some of which are on this call. And there's an abundance of technology, and the technology is great. The technology is enabling. The technology is not difficult. And there are peers. The beauty of higher ed, from my point of view, you all love to talk to each other. Honestly, that's how my company gets business, is you love to chat with each other. You share, there are no secrets. You share everything. And so forums like this and others are, learn the technology, you'll learn simply, but really get your head into the space of how do I make people's lives better? How do I enable the business? How do I reduce risk? How do I increase efficiency? Those are not technology problems, they're business problems.
Yeah, for me, one of the, I wouldn't say regret, because I realized that it doesn't matter how much you learn in the IT world, there's always something new. There's always something that's coming up. So I wish I had the ability of learning. I think that's the key. We'd be able to adopt and learn something new on the fly. I think that's super important. I wish I have a better, ability of that, because there's no way you know everything. You should be able to quickly understand the problem and find a solution, and be able to learn it quickly. But another thing I kind of want to address is that I wish also that be more consistent with our upper management, to let them understand when we have some concerns, we shouldn't be just pushed on the side. As long as it's working now. I mean, we like this right now with all this the outbreak, and everyone has to be working from home. We suddenly realize there's so many things we could have done towards some of the problems, and those problems we actually did see it. We mentioned to the upper management, but at the time, as Ms. Gary said, IT has been pushing aside a little bit more and more, and the voice is less and less. But now suddenly we realize that if I was stay on that topic or constantly express how I felt about certain things, we would be in this, we could be in better situation, better position.
Thank you all for that perspective. That's helpful. Hopefully for some of the attendees, that gives you some food for thought. We only have a few minutes left, so final question I'm going to throw out, and I'm going to limit you to one resource or recommendation. What is one resource, tool, recommendation that you would hope people consider kind of walking away from this? I know, only one.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, go ahead, please.
So at the risk of sounding like a commercial, consider Build. Disclosure, we're a partner. We've been involved with it for a long time, for an extended period of time. But Build or a tool like it is, I think, very empowering to an organization, and not just the technical side, but the business side of the organization. Business first, take opportunities, take some chances, and move the ball forward. I think everybody should keep that top of mind.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I think that's, Build, in my mind, Build is a business tool that IT gets to use. And it's like, think about it, right, spreadsheets, right? Spreadsheets, when they first came out, were IT type tools, and the business just adopted them. And honestly, today, IT is followers when it comes to spreadsheet and development of spreadsheets and complex models and things like that. So I believe that for me and my organization as consultants, we learn a lot by forums such as this and such as EDUCAUSE, even with all the private sector work we do. If we monitor those forums, we really get to see what all of you are trying to focus on. That's why I say sharing is great. And that gives us like an early warning sign. Because surprisingly, you're at the forefront of implementation of a lot of technologies, and the one we're using now, Zoom, right? All of our commercial clients use Zoom, right? But they have never been pressed to try to use Zoom for, meeting of 50, 60, 70, 1,000 people, while in higher ed, you've been working on platforms like that for a long time. And so seeing that happen and seeing the chatter that goes on, or listening to the chatter that goes on, is invaluable in terms of getting ahead of things.
Yeah, well said. Another thing I guess we can say is Google. Search engines solve problems, try to learn how to solve problems. That's come down to it is, this feels like that's what we've been dealing with lately, is every day, big, small problems. Search it, find an answer, solve it, move forward.
Good perspective, Saul. Well, that wraps up our time. Thank you all for being on our panel today. And again, thank you for Harvard Partners for being our sponsor. We'll go ahead and send out the recording of today's webinar following. And if you have any questions about Harvard Partners or Koali, feel free to let us know. In that case, have a good rest of your afternoon. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.